everybody, welcome back. We're going to do day 2 of factoring polynomials. Day 1, if you recall, we did the difference in sum of two cubes. Today we're going to look at how to factor using quadratic form and factoring by grouping. So first of all, if you remember how to factor just a regular quadratic equation or quadratic expression, is I take factors of this negative 12 here and what are factors of negative 12 to add up to negative 4, and that would be probably negative 6 and 2. And so this would factor to x minus 6 times x plus 2. Okay, and that's how we would factor a majority of quadratic equations. Of course, we had different variations of those. So when I get into a polynomial like this, you'll notice that this power is not squared. So it is not a quadratic. This is a polynomial with fourth degree. It's a quartic polynomial. Quartic trinomial actually, but it looks like a quadratic because there's 3 terms, and we have this power of 4 here, and then half the power. If you look closely here, a power of 2 here, and half of that power is 1, and so we have the same sort of form of a quadratic here, but it's not quite a quadratic, so that's why it's called quadratic form. Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a, and we're going to let it equal x squared. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this as x squared, that's the same thing as x to the 4th, minus 2x squared, this, minus 8. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an x squared here and x squared here. I'm going to substitute in for a. Okay, and so I'm going to take and write, this is going to be a squared, okay, minus 2a, because I'm going to let x squared be a, minus 8. Okay, so I plugged in a anytime where I saw x squared. Okay, so this would be x squared squared, and then 2x squared minus 8. And now this looks exactly like a quadratic equation, right? I can factor this, saying what's factors of negative 8 that add up to negative 2. Well, that's going to be negative 4 and 2. So I can factor this guy into x, or excuse me, I'm going to put a minus 4 times a plus 2, right? And I'm all factored. Well, except that we substituted a here in for x squared. So now I'm going to go ahead and bring these back down and substitute these back in for x squared. So I can rewrite these now as x squared minus 4 times x squared plus 2. And that's factored. However, be careful because this is also factorable. This is a difference of 2 squares. So we're going to continue to factor that into x plus 2 times x minus 2. And then, of course, we want to make sure we keep our x squared plus 4. And now we have this completely factored. And so when you see the term completely factored, that's what that means. There's nothing left that can be factored or factorable. Okay, so this is completely factored. Okay, now as you get comfortable with this, you don't have to use a substitution. You can just go, oh, hey, this is a quadratic form. I have a power of 4, and half of that 4 is 2. I can just use the same method as a quadratic and find factors of negative 8 that add up to 2, and just skip straight down to this part here. We just use a substitution method to make sure you understand what's happening. Okay. So we can do that for this next one. Instead of using the substitution method, we'll just say, hey, I've got a quadratic form here. I know this power of 4 and this power of 2. This is half of the 4, so that's a quadratic form. So I'm just going ahead and just factor what's negative 18. Factors of negative 18 add up to negative 7. Oh, jumped ahead of myself. Negative 7 is going to be negative 9 and a positive 2. So I know that that's going to be, and then I'm going to take factors of x to the 4th, and that's going to be x squared and x squared this time instead of just x and x, right? And then minus 9 and plus 2. And now it's all factored. Okay, but not quite yet because this guy is also factorable. So I'm going to make sure I factor this into x plus 3 times x minus 3. And then, of course, keeping my x squared plus 2, which is not factorable, right? That's as far as we can go. And this is fully factored. So you have to make sure that you get that factored all the way. Okay, and that is factoring using quadratic form. It's quite simple. You just have to know how to do it. Okay, you have to be able to recognize it. All right. Our next method is going to be factoring by grouping. This usually happens when we have 4 terms. Notice in my factoring by quadratic form, I have 3 terms. It's a trinomial. Okay, and I have highest power is 4. This one usually is half of that, or some sort of power here, then half of that, and so forth. This one is 4 terms. Okay, and I usually will recognize this and go, hey, I've got common factors here, 6 and 3, and ends, and I have common factors here, 8 and 4, and that's how I know I can try my factoring by grouping. So I'm going to go ahead and group these guys and group these guys, and then I'm going to factor out. I have a common factor of 3 between 6 and 3, and I also have an n squared. I have 2 n's I'm going to pull out of there. That's going to leave me with 6 divided by 3 is going to leave me with a 2. I'm going to pull out 2 n's here, so I'll have just a 2n. Plus 3 divided by 3 is 1. And I pulled out both n's there, so it's going to be just 2n plus 1. Be sure you put that 1 there. Okay, it's not just a nothing. 3n squared divided by 3n squared is 1. So you got to make sure you put that there. Okay. Plus, and the common factor here is going to be 4. I'm going to pull that out. 4, and then no n's in common. So then I'm going to 8 divided by 4 is 2. And I also have the n still in there. Plus, and then 4 divided by 4 is 1. Again, just like we did before with the factoring trinomials, those should be exactly the same. If they're not, you cannot factor it. Okay? Those have to be the same. So now I can actually factor out this 2n plus 1. And I'm left over my 3n squared plus 4. And that's factored. Then I want to make sure I look at my factors and make sure I can't factor them any further. I can't factor 3n squared plus 4 any further, and I'm fully factored there. Okay? Okay, let's look at the next one. So let's see. I have, the numbers aren't in common, but I do have some x's in common here. And I do have a 3 and a 2 here, so this looks pretty similar. So I'm going to go ahead and try factoring by grouping. Be careful with these negatives. So what I like to do here is put a plus and negative here and make sure I group that negative in there. Okay, be careful with that. Okay, so I'm going to factor out an x squared here. That's going to leave me up here with a 3x and then plus 2. I pulled out that squared. Now notice that this has a negative sign for both of them. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1 because there's nothing to factor out except a negative 1. So I'm going to go plus, and I can do a negative, I can do plus. I'm going to factor out a negative 1. Okay. And that's going to take a negative 3x divided by negative 1. That's what's going to leave me with a positive 3x. And then a negative 2 divided by negative 1. That is what's going to leave me with a positive 2. So I have to get these two factors exactly the same. And sorry about that. I should have made this in red. I goofed up by not making it in red. What was I thinking? Okay. Now I have these two factors exactly the same. I can pull those two factors out and factor those out. So 3x plus 2. Okay, and I'm left over with my x squared minus 1. Double check to make sure I'm finished. Ooh, I am not, because this is a difference of 2 squares. So I want to make sure I factor this guy out to x plus 1 times x minus 1. And then, of course, I'm going to have my guy here, 3x plus 2. Now I'm fully factored. I have all my factors accounted for. Nothing else will factor out. Okay, so that is factoring by quadratic form and with grouping. Those are my next 2 methods I'm going to be using. You all will have a worksheet coming up. Here's, first of all, our summary of everything we've been doing. Here's my perfect square trinomials, difference of 2 squares, my sum and difference of cubes. We just added our quadratic form and grouping today. So you guys have a factoring worksheet. It's going to include a little bit of everything, okay, but mostly factoring by quadratic form and by grouping. And then please bring your questions to Zoom because I'm hoping you will have some. You should, okay? And I'll talk to you all later. Thank you. Bye-bye.